Awesome. All right. Welcome, everybody. So it's Ashley from Theta Healing. And today I am with my friend Jess, who I met through a woman who I actually haven't even met yet, really cool acupuncturist in Sudbury. And so Jess is an astrologer. And I had my very first real chart reading with Jess. It was amazing because the cool thing that I liked best about it, I mean, like everybody knows their sun sign, like I'm a Cancer, and most people know like what that means, but I didn't know that there's like a whole other part of my makeup, and it actually explained a lot of things for me. So anyway, and Jess and I are now connected over social media, and she was noticing about the 12 steps to emotional freedom and the journaling class that I have going on. And so she commented on it, and I was like, ooh, help us talk about the topic of surrender, because surrender seems, well, it's, kind of blended in between the first step and the second step, but it really is something that's very current for all of us. I think that we all kind of agree that this whole COVID thing not only is a trigger for a lot of us, it's really stirring up some old PTSD and anxiety for a lot of us, but even if it's not stirring up old stuff, I think that it's bringing to light the need for all of us to do some self-care and to take this time as an opportunity to grow. So that's kind of why I'm launching the 12 steps in the middle of this COVID craziness. But the 12 steps, the real 12 steps, as in AA, I've always had a very strong affliction to them and felt really, I don't know what the word is, but like, I honor them, even though I've never been in recovery. I have seen so many people go through them, and it's really deep spiritual work. I mean, it's almost like once you get past that first step of admitting that you're powerless over drugs and alcohol, it's like really deep. Who am I? Where am I going? And how am I going to get there? Spiritual work. So that's kind of why I'm helping to bring it out to everybody in like a non-addict type way. And Jess also has gone through the 12 steps herself. So today the topic is how in gosh darn's name do we surrender? How do we do this in the middle of what we're all going through? How do we do that, Jess? How do you do it?
Well, how do I do it? Well, thank you for having me. This is I'm psyched to talk about this kind of stuff. So, I am in recovery from opiate addiction and alcoholism. So the 12 steps are near and dear to me. I do my best to practice as many as I need to every single day. Step one is actually kind of at the same time like the simplest but also the most difficult, right? It sounds really easy to admit that you're powerless over something, and actually admitting that you're powerless over something is relatively easy, but then it's kind of like, what do you do next?
Yeah.
And do we really actually admit it? Just saying something isn't always enough. You have to kind of live in this step. And to be perfectly honest, I take a first step every single day. One of the other steps, step 11, which ironically enough is like the first step that I started practicing, which is prayer and meditation. Every single morning I get out of bed and I get on my knees and I pray. And I'm not a religious person. Like, I am very spiritual. I bucked the whole idea of getting on my knees for the longest time.
Yep.
But one of the things that they say in the program is you got to take suggestions. If somebody has what you want, which is, serenity, sobriety, whatever it is, you got to do what they do. And so many people said, get on your knees, get on your knees. And I was just like, oh, right. But when I finally started doing it, it was an act of surrender, right? Surrender to this whole idea, which I thought was so ridiculous, like to get on my knees. But I'll tell you, it makes all the difference in the world. And literally the first thing I do every morning, first thing I do every morning is make my bed. And then, because I can't kneel next to a unmade bed, because that's just my OCD. But then I kneel down and I say my prayer. And one of the very first things out of my mouth every morning is, God, please help me to remember that I am an addict and how unmanageable that I'm powerless over my addiction and how unmanageable my life had become. Because the first step is kind of like two parts. It's admitting that you're powerless, but also, remind me how unmanageable my life was. Because the thing about powerlessness is that nobody ever feels like powerless, right? Like when you're in that moment, that stressful moment, nobody ever stops and is like, oh, I feel so powerless, right? Like it usually, for me anyway, presents as frustration, right? I'm frustrated because I want something outside of me to be different.
Yep.
And so how do I, what can I possibly do? And of course, as addicts, but not just addicts, like all people do this to a certain degree, addicts kind of tend to do it a little bit more. We want to exert our will on all of the things that are around us. And, I mean, the universe just doesn't work that way. To a certain extent, we can imprint on what's going around us if we're kind of in flow, but like, you have to understand that there is something so much bigger than us going on all the time, not just now. I mean, now, of course, but in general, we are relatively powerless over just about everything. And part of, working the 12 steps is meant to bring you in alignment with the idea that there are some things that are within your control, but the vast majority of things out there are not.
Mm-hmm.
And so, the wisdom in knowing the difference, right, between those two things is really what the 12 steps strive to kind of teach you. Because it's always a work in progress, right? Once you enter recovery, you're never supposed to stop working the 12 steps.
Right.
That I admitted a long time ago that I was powerless over drugs and alcohol, but it didn't get me clean right away. Right. I had to keep admitting it, and I had to keep testing that fence, because it's just not something that all of a sudden you wake up one day and you're like, I'm powerless. And that's, like I said, it was easy to kind of say it out loud, but to actually live every day remembering that I'm powerless, because I want to take my will back all the time.
Yeah.
All the time. I mean, every day something happens where I'm just kind of like, oh, maybe I can control the situation. And inevitably I learn that I can't. And so, the sooner you kind of come to terms with that whole thing, it's very freeing, right? Like people think of the idea of surrender as like giving up. And in a certain way, and that's scary, right? And that's admitting defeat, and that there's something wrong with that.
Right.
And I understand that connotation. But the irony of the whole thing is that once you do that, you free yourself up into this completely separate energetic space where now you're just kind of like, I've admitted that I'm powerless over this. So like, now I don't have to deal with it anymore. Like now I just have to deal with kind of the fallout, if you will, of having admitted that powerlessness, which is so much easier. Like it really is.
But you guys, the thing I like about how you apply these concepts to everyday life though. Like, so yeah, that first step for you, drugs and alcohol, like I'm down with that. But you guys, the recovered folks in the world, like I've noticed that you'll even, and you just said this too, like there are certain things in your day where you want to have will over something, right? Mm-hmm. Even like frustration with kids, I can imagine, right?
Oh God, every day.
Like,
yeah.
lots of my clients, they come to seek, this spiritual development because they're struggling in life. And I almost always can trace a lot of that back to like relationships that they have with people and troubled relationships, right? Like they're struggling with that. So tell us how you do what you just described with everyday regular things too.
Like turning my will over?
Yeah.
So that actually gets us into step 3 a little bit. So it's interesting, right? As an astrologer, the number 12 absolutely fascinates me. There's 12 signs, right? There's 12 steps, there are 12 apostles. There's so many different ways that all of these things line up. Yep. And so, one of the ways that the steps line up is kind of, you can kind of separate them out. So like steps 1, 2, and 3 really do all kind of belong together. So when we talk about admitting powerlessness, that's just an admission. That's step 1. Then we get to step 2, and it's about, came to believe that a power greater than myself could restore me to sanity. Okay. So again, these are not action steps. These are just kind of like, I'm now forming a belief system that like, I have this problem and I need, that I'm powerless over it. No human power can really help me. I need something bigger. Step 3 gets us into the whole idea of turning our will over to the care of a higher power as we understood him, her, whatever, whatever your God is, right? How do I do that? Well, to be perfectly honest, in a lot of ways, I don't know, right? Like I just do it. And I know that, so let me back up and explain it a little bit, right? I absolutely, when I first entered recovery, this was one of the hardest things that I had to do because I have a ton of Virgo in my chart, for lack of a better way to explain it. And so control is like a big thing, right? It is. So, I overthink things. I need things to be neat. I need things to be orderly. And to a certain extent, I can do that, right? Like I can make sure, that I have built in a certain amount of self-care into my day, right? I can make sure that I get at least 15 minutes of meditation in a day, right? Like I have kind of identified the types of things that I need and that I can control.
Mhm.
And then I just completely let go of the rest of it. Now, that sounds way easier said than done. But your example with my kids, like perfect, absolutely perfect example, right? I have 4 children. I'm a single mom. I have like so much that goes on during the course of my day with these kids where I can't control anything, right? Like I, especially with the older ones, like they're starting to get to an age where they want to do their own thing. And so, to kind of, again, just kind of recognize, what can I control and what do I turn over? And it all kind of comes back to prayer for me, right? Like I don't drop down on my knees 20 times a day, but I can't tell you how many times. I mean, that usually only happens once, maybe twice. Like if I, at night, sometimes I'll pray on my knees again. But like during the course of the day, I practice the pause. And this is something that you really need to, for me, again, I'll speak just for myself, but I suspect that a lot of people have the same kind of thing going on, is that we're just so conditioned to think that like we can just jump in and exert our will in any given situation. And it takes time, and you have to be gentle with yourself. You have to really learn that, there are times where your will absolutely will work, but that there are more times where it won't. And
Mhm.
so you're spinning your wheels or you're causing yourself to kind of sit in anger, when the better thing to do is to just take that step back mentally, physically, if you need to, actually remove yourself from the situation and take some breaths and really think to yourself, like, what is it that I'm trying to accomplish here? What can I realistically do? Or am I just kind of having this visceral reaction of, I don't like what's going on around me right now, so let me just, you know, do what I can to exert my will in the situation.
Yeah.
And I pray all the time, like, thy will, not mine, be done. Thy will, not mine, be done. I say that to myself hundreds of times, sometimes like in a given day, where it's just, you start to learn how to recognize situations that you're powerless in. At first, it's really hard, right? So my suggestion to people who are new to recovery is just assume in the beginning that you're powerless over everything. Because if you kind of start from that place, you have nowhere to go but up, right? Like if you start from the alternative, which is I can control everything, then you're going to get discouraged because you're constantly going to be having to dial yourself back as you inevitably realize that there's way more that you can't control
Yeah.
than there is than you can, So if you start from this place of like, I'm powerless over everything, by default, you will eventually start to build yourself up because you start to realize like, oh, okay, no, I can handle this. I can change this. This is something in my control, And so it's almost like that little serotonin boost that you get from doing something simple of like making your bed in the morning, where you're just like, oh, I'm not powerless here. I can do something here. I can do something here. And then, it's over time, you just start to kind of figure out where are you powerless, where aren't you? And every day will present you with a new challenge in this area. But it's like anything with like with a muscle, or like with meditation. I didn't start out as a good meditator. I started out as somebody who sat there and planned out every single minute of my day, Virgo, like just like in my head. But you get better at it over time with practice.
Yeah. Yep. So true. And I think that people you know, don't aren't willing to, or get fearful, I guess, of the work too, because
Yeah.
anything worth it in the end takes work. And that also includes spiritual work,
Yeah.
um, of all sorts. Like I have had so many clients come to me and say, I mean, literally without saying it, right? Once a month, just fix me. Right? I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, well, I can give you an amazing Reiki treatment and you can leave here feeling like you're on cloud 9 and things can all make sense and everything can be lined up. But then you're going to go home and you're going to go back to work and you're going to have the same glitches, right?
Right. The resentments will continue to pile up.
Totally, because, in the yogic tradition, they're called samskaras, right? It's like
Mm-hmm.
we form these scars when we're little. And people laugh, like, I think I liked Freud when I was in school, but like, I mean,
Oh, I love
I'm
Freud.
constantly talking about that. Like we have to go back, man, and we have to like look at our life and step 4, right? Like
Step 4.
all about that. So I can't wait for step 4 because of that. But if people that are watching this are struggling with, they want the serenity, right?
Yeah.
They want the freedom from the anxiety. They want the peacefulness in their hearts. And I'm so glad that you said that. It takes work. It doesn't just happen. You don't just get up and you're like, whoo, today I'm just going to be peaceful. You know,
Right.
today
Oh God, no.
no, it takes a lot of work. So I'm really happy that you just said that, because not everybody likes to hear it from me, and I say it over and over again. But that's pretty cool. And then in terms of like, you know, before I let you go, in terms of like what's happening with this whole COVID thing, like how do we? And I know you're going to say you just do it because, right? And lots of people, there's just so much fear out there. And if we sit on our phones, right, and we're scrolling through social, we take on what we plug into, right?
Oh yeah.
So how do you stay present in the world of social media, and how do you plug into that higher consciousness and that pure light on a daily basis while keeping yourself surrendering and present in the moment?
Yeah. Well, so interestingly enough, and I never really thought that I would say this, but my career as an addict has prepared me pretty well for what's going on right now.
Yeah.
So grateful that I got sober when I did, because I can't imagine how much differently my response to this whole COVID thing would be if I was not already working the steps. It's honestly like so many of the skills that I've learned in recovery have have served me here, right? Because if you think about it, as an addict, I'm used to having to, live with a potentially deadly disease kind of over my shoulder all the time. And, being in the steps, it's all about, learning how to cope with that fact and not succumbing to the fear, because that is essentially what, most, and the science behind addiction is pretty clear on the fact that, addicts have overactive fear centers, which served us really well, when human beings had to hunt and gather and, protect their families, like with potential violence, right? But nowadays we don't have those issues, but that, our brains haven't evolved to kind of understand that, right? So this epidemic of stress and anxiety and everything that we see in everyday life, like, yeah, it doesn't lead most people down the path of addiction. But, for those of us that it does, it becomes a life or death situation. The ability to kind of, control that fear center and not let it dominate. Okay. So, for me, meditation is key. I can say without a doubt, I mean, there's tons of other things that I do as part of my daily program of recovery, but without meditation, I don't think that I ever would have been able to kind of get over that hump. Over time, and it takes time, it's not something, like you said, you don't just wake up one day and you're like, I'm peaceful, right? Like it was not an instant for me, but I will say that, as soon as I kind of surrendered and gave into the idea that like, this is what my life has to look like for the rest of my life, it didn't take as long as I thought it would. And, I am very much, my nervous system is parasympathetic dominant, right? Because I meditate. And so I don't start from that fear baseline. If you are somebody who starts at that fear baseline right now, then, my number one suggestion would be like, back away from social media, back away from all media, because the mass hysteria right now is at peak levels. I mean, it's absolutely crazy. It is, I rely a lot on social media for my work. Right. And obviously just to stay in touch, now that we're all kind of isolating, I mean, for addicts in particular, isolation is what our disease wants us to do. Right. And so we're kind of like in this unique situation of, okay, we need to do what we can to prevent the spread. But at the same time, that's a life, us being able to connect with other addicts on a daily basis is life or death for us. Right. So, I mean, for me too, like I use astrology as a tool for my everyday kind of life. And I don't, some people are kind of into that. Other people aren't. Like for me, forms a major part of my spiritual base. And so just having a basic idea of what's going on astrologically and how, this whole COVID thing, I mean, I predicted this back in like January, right? I'm not special. Like all astrologers have been hammering this for a long time. Like this is coming. the reality is that from a purely astrological standpoint, this is kind of just the beginning of what's going to turn out to be a major, major transformation for all of humanity. And ground zero of that really kind of is like the United States right now.
Yeah.
And there's, we have Pluto, which is, he rules fear and anxiety, right? That's like his turf. And he is so, so strong right now. So energetically speaking, the collective is just absorbing so much fear. And, now, because we're all kind of just saturated with it, it's like pouring out into the collective, and it's,
Right.
doing what we can to meditate. And, if you believe in like protection spells or whatever, there's so many different ways that people kind of do this, or just the whole idea of like, imagine a white light around yourself, because now more than ever, it is imperative for people to protect themselves.
Yeah.
The vast majority of people are generating enough fear from the inside out that they don't also need to be absorbing, what everybody else is putting out there. Cause everybody's just kind of, it's epic, right? It's just crazy how much is out there. And you had mentioned work, right? So one of the other major players here, like this whole thing was kind of predicted by the Saturn Pluto conjunction that happened back in January.
Yeah.
And if you trace back like a lot of major epidemics, they all happened right after this, right? So it's like, this virus is not like the be all end all. It's just a catalyst that is meant to bring in bigger changes. Okay. So we're just at the beginning, right? And I don't even mean like of the virus, like who knows how long that's going to take to play out, but like we're in the beginning of a major change cycle that is meant to kind of take down all of these patriarchal systems that we've built up around ourselves that may have served us like earlier on in our, in our lifespan as a country, but they're really not serving. Like it's not a sustainable, the models that we have right now have not been sustainable.
Yeah.
So I talked about Pluto being.
Or are they for individuals either?
Well, right. No, it is, it's like as above, so below, right? It
Yeah.
resonates on every level, personal, transpersonal, all of humanity. But the other player here is Saturn, and you were talking about work and putting in the work, and like that's what Saturn does, right? He forces us to work. And if you can, every human being has free will. You can decide that you're not going to work when you're faced with the kind of idea of like, okay, I'm hitting a block, I'm frustrated, there's something here that I really, there's a hump that I need to get over. You absolutely can turn around and shy away from it, but then you don't rightfully get to expect rewards at that point. You really have to, at some point, internalize the whole idea of, we're not entitled to anything. Universal laws and energies and stuff like that, like we're here and there's so much to benefit from, but no single person on this earth is entitled to just kind of like reap nothing but rewards. You really have to work, because otherwise, any rewards that you get are just, they're fleeting. And, that's Jupiter, who's also part of this whole big thing, right? So it's this whole idea of balance, and really just kind of trying to achieve that perfect balance between expansion and contraction, and all the while trying to keep it above, this kind of baseline of fear that everybody is resonating at right now.
We are. And I think that there's, like you were saying, about that like fear kind of button inside of addicts. It's also an interesting, lots of addicts had experienced trauma.
Oh yeah.
Right. And so, but it's weird, like lots of us have experienced trauma, but we didn't end up as addicts. But it's that sensitivity. Like there's a lot of people, like my clients would sit down in front of me and they, start talking for 15 minutes. And I'm like, well, cause you're an empath. And they're like, right. Cause you feel everything of everybody. You take on all their stuff. And they were like, yeah. And they just don't even, there's so many people out there that don't know it, but also
they have no idea.
Empath stuff is getting turned on like crazy because of the shift, because we are shifting as a collective consciousness. People are so sensitive, and it's more so than ever. And if you don't catch that and you're sensitive and you don't do the work, that's when you get disease. Right?
Oh, completely bogged down.
Yeah. That's when you get the migraines and the backaches and the sickness and the autoimmune issues and all of that stuff. So it really behooves all of us to do the work, regardless of kind of where we are in this shift or where we kind of see ourselves. So I loved your tools. I thought they were cool.
Thanks.
Yeah, I think it was super helpful. So if people are interested in getting a reading, Misfortune, how do they do that?
So there's a few ways you can get me. I have a website. It's misfortuneastrology.com, Misfortune, one word, misfortuneastrology.com. And then I'm on social media. That's where the ones come in. So I'm on Facebook and Instagram. It's at misfortune1111. So MSFORTUNE1111. You can find me kind of all over social media.
I'll tag you in this post too, so people can just click on it to find
Cool. Yeah.
you. So, and then just very quickly, like, what does getting a reading do for people who kind of feel stuck?
So astrology is such a good tool for anybody who's, I mean, whether you're feeling stuck or not, I've kind of come to a point where I can't imagine what my life would be like without it. The thing about life in general is that we've all kind of come to believe that everything is so incredibly random. And the truth is that a lot of it really isn't, right? Like we are born into a specific energy pattern, every single one of us. And there are, Akashic belief systems that exist where, that we actually chose the life that we live. And for whatever reason, we're born into this realm, like with complete amnesia. And so what astrology, it's crazy, right? Like when you think about it, it's like, what is the point, right? But the point is to grow. The point is to evolve. And
remember what
the point is to hopefully come back to the idea of like, okay, there is a purpose here and I had one, and and what was it? Because I made this choice. So what astrology is like, it's basically a roadmap. It's a roadmap that we all gave ourselves that shows us, where on our soul's evolutionary path we are, what evolutionary point we had in incarnating this time, what tools we gave ourselves, what weaknesses we gave ourselves. And so, a lot of people kind of come to astrology just kind of thinking, oh, this is interesting. And, for me anyway, I practice evolutionary astrology. So I really am all about, not just saying like, oh, okay, your Mercury's here, and so you're really talkative or something like that. It's more about piecing all of the puzzle together for a person and saying to them like, hey, like you were called to me at this particular time in your life because, not because you're necessarily curious about astrology, but because like I'm a signpost for you, like I'm here to say to you, like, get your butt back in gear and get back on this path. Because that's where a lot of, spiritual anxiety and angst comes from, right? Is this whole kind of subconscious idea that, this can't all be meaningless. So, but people don't know where to search to find the meaning, right? And astrology is like, number one, like come in and get a reading, and I will absolutely, after a couple of hours, I'll be able to say to you, like, this is the purpose. This is the reason that you came here. I mean, it's really deep and profound. A lot of people discount astrology kind of altogether for reasons that you were saying in the beginning, which is like, everybody knows their sun sign, and you were a perfect example of this, where it's like, I know my sun sign, but I don't really necessarily resonate with it. And it's like, oh, because it's just one piece of a giant puzzle. So you need to see the whole puzzle. And then once they see it, they're like, oh my God. And it just, boom, it brings everything kind of back into perspective. And just to see what's going on, right? Like a lot of the people who have come to me, I mean, I would say 90% of the readings that I've done since like November of last year are people who were in direct line of this Saturn-Pluto energy that I was talking about before.
Oh.
And these people have no astrological background whatsoever, but it's not coincidental that they were hit the hardest by this energy. And now all of a sudden they're coming, they're seeking out astrology, right? I mean, it's crazy how that happens, but I see it all the time where like, I will have a grouping of people over a course of a period of time, and they're all in line with the same particular transit. And it's like, it's not random, like it's not random. We all get it on some level that this is happening to us. It's just, astrology gives it shape, right? It gives it like I said, a map. It's basically a map. And it's, I'm able to say like, okay, this is where it's hitting you. This is the area of life. This is when you can expect it to, to kind of chill. This is when you can expect it to pick back up again.
Yeah.
And forewarned is forearmed. Sometimes the first step in relieving some of that anxiety is just knowing that it's not random, that you're not just thrown into this kind of like meat grinder of a universe, that, you can, if you're questioning what areas of your life you have free will and can actually exercise it, astrology is a great way to kind of figure that out.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. I had that exact that exact feeling afterwards. I was like, oh, that all makes sense now. And all right, cool. Like, I don't need to necessarily be super fearful of what's coming down the line because A, I chose it.
Right.
And B, I kind of know that it's like a cyclical thing
Yeah.
and that it's all for my highest good.
It's, yeah, it always is. Even the, even the toughest transits, the universe wants our highest and greatest good. The universe is always expanding. It's just that a lot of the mechanisms that it uses, are tension filled, but tension's necessary for growth. Human beings we love the path of least resistance. And there are certain areas of life where you can go through the path of least resistance and be perfectly happy. But, unfortunately for humanity, there are areas of life where work is required. And, when you come out of the other side of that, there's no greater feeling. I mean, I had to put in a ton of work to get sober, but my life is second to none now. I put in the work and I reap the benefits of it every day. Every day is not perfect, but my worst days in sobriety are 10,000 times better than my best days when I was using. So
yeah, praise God, literally.
yeah, seriously. Every day, every
well
chance
done.
I get.
Well done on the work. And thank you for spending, half hour talking to me on this topic. And I will make sure that anyone can just click the link to find you. And I highly recommend getting a reading. So
Thank you.
thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.